Are you lying awake at 3 a.m., terrified that AI will replace you? Panicking about robot creativity? Losing sleep over algorithmic intelligence? Here's the beautiful irony. The very thing keeping you awake can knock you out cold. Introducing Comatose, the sleep aid that curates mind-numbingly boring AI content and delivers it straight to your bedside. Comatose finds the most magnificently tedious AI writing on Earth. LinkedIn posts about Monday motivation, blogs that start with, "In today's fast-paced digital landscape," business articles that somehow use synergy and paradigm shift 17 times. One paragraph of AI-generated stakeholder transformation, and you'll be unconscious faster than you can say hallucination. Side effects may include sudden appreciation for typos, a phobia of M-dashes, vivid dreams about leveraging synergies, and compulsive use of sentence fragments and parenthetical statements for emphasis. Do not take Comatose if you enjoy AI poetry or find chatbot conversations stimulating. May cause immediate unconsciousness when exposed to automated thank you emails. Stop worrying yourself sleepless over Gen AI and start using its sedative content for a refreshing night's sleep. Slop into bed with Comatose, the only AI content curator that'll knock you out cold.
You're probably wondering, what was that and where am I? Well, you are here at the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell, and I wanted to play that fun little spot that I literally created last night for this satirical product called Comatose. Now, where did Comatose come from? It's actually a name for a sleep aid that I came up with many years ago, and it just cracked me up. Comatose. You know, you'd love to sleep if you're in a coma, but you don't want to be out forever. So it's just a dose. Anyways, I used that idea and that product to demonstrate the Story Cycle Genie and that it can create a brand from scratch. A lot of people have been asking me that, meaning if you don't have a website that it can refer to, and maybe you don't have a lot of marketing materials or any marketing materials, maybe you just have a few notes written down or maybe a marketing plan. Can the Genie help you develop a brand story? It can. And what I did is I took Comatose, and I thought it'd just be fun to say, all right, this is a sleep aid that curates all the crazy AI slop out there to put you to sleep fast. And I fed it into the Brand Intelligence Genie, and I spent about 90 minutes with the Genie to create a market definition and really design my own market category for Comatose. From there, I dropped it into the Brand Story Genie and spent just under 30 minutes creating the foundational brand story. From there, I moved into the audience stories for my 3 specific audiences with brand strategy for each one. The first one is insomniac content creators, which that spot is for. The second one is sleepless business professionals that are losing their mind over AI. And the third one are chief marketing officers that are wrestling too with this existential crisis of AI. Then I had the Genie create and write a landing page for me for Comatose. You can go check it out at businessofstory.com/Comatose, all one word. From there, because we don't yet have image creation in the Genie, it's coming. I went to ChatGPT and had it design me a logo and a bottle that you can check out. And then I created this spot using the Story Cycle Genie. I probably spent about a half hour working with it and tweaking it and getting it to where I want. Then I went over to 11 AI and created the voice around it, dropped it into GarageBand and added the music track, and voila. And literally under 6 hours, I have a complete brand that I could take to market, Comatose. And, doing it the old-fashioned way, that would have taken months. I spent with the Genie about $250 to make that all happen. And the old way would have cost me easily 30 to 40 to 50 grand to make all that happen. So that is the power of AI. I don't call it artificial intelligence anymore. I call it artful intelligence, because if you know how to use it, you can have a blast with it. It will amplify you as a content creator, as an artist, whatever. It's not going to replace you if you use it right. And that was just an example of it. So if you want to refine your brand story or create one from scratch, jump on over to storycyclegenie.ai and see how we have transformed artificial intelligence into artful intelligence so you can build a brand that stands out and attracts the right group of people, which we are going to be talking about today on the Business of Story.
You'll hear business owners say, I can address any problem to anyone. If I'm a sign painter, I'm going to paint a sign for anybody who comes in the shop. No problem. Well, it's not always great to do that because to be specific, there's a strange paradox. The more specific you are about your pitch and your story, the more generally it can reach people because people divide into groups, and we're always using the stories we tell to make an evaluation about someone. Is this person in my group? Are they worth listening to?
I hear it all the time. People saying everybody can use my product or service. That's when I ask, so how well is your advertising actually working? And they typically say, not great. You see, I'm a big believer in the Pareto principle, which states that 80% of your revenue is generated by 20% of your customers, which represents one target audience. But how well are you telling your specific story to that specific group? Are you putting them to sleep? Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell, and today you're going to meet Lee Schneider. He's the founder of Red Cup Agency, an award-winning podcast producer, a veteran storyteller whose credits include Good Morning America, Dateline NBC, and documentaries for the History Channel and more. Lee's also a USC professor, novelist, and creator of these storyline sessions. Lee shares how to find the right story for your audience, his 3 essential stories every business needs, and practical ways to test and refine your narrative for real-world impact. So let's get after it. Hello, Lee. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here.
And you're coming to us from sometimes beautiful, sometimes rainy, sometimes snowy, sometimes windy Southern California. Santa Monica?
Santa Monica, that's right. Not much snow. Snow would be a shock, but we have had ice and some pretty rugged weather up in the mountains. Luckily, we haven't been up there recently.
Yeah, well, the weather patterns are so bizarre these days, as we were talking about earlier, that I'm glad you're able to make it.
Great. Yeah.
So your background is fascinating to me because you do, come from a screenwriting background. You've written for a lot of different programs, a lot of experience in that. And you shared that you might have a story about you pitching a sitcom to a bunch of comedians, and then they just started. Yeah. Tell us what happened.
Well, pitching is such a strange art because my style was to go in with nothing, no briefcase, no notes, just to show up, accept the bottled water, and they'd say, okay, what do you got for us today? Now, pitching comedy, you're usually pitching to people who are comedy writers. And that's a rough crowd. What happened is I had just come from New York. I was probably 5 years out. And they asked, well, where are you from? And I said, New York. So before I could begin my pitch, they started singing, New York, New York, it's a wonderful town. And the whole room is singing at me. And I'm going, oh boy, this is going to be a rough ride. And it really taught me to, first of all, when you're pitching, just kind of expect anything. Like, people may purposefully derail you. And secondly, you really only have one shot. I used to think that I would go into those pitch meetings, and if they didn't like what I was pitching, I'd say, hey, wait, I got another story. Let me try one. And that never works. It never works. They're really there to hear you pitch the one thing that, the agents had talked about or they had been prepped for. So, thick skin is the term that comes up, and I don't know if that's really what you need, but you certainly have to be ready for anything.
Anything coming your way. And that's true in the business world as well. I know I've been in my fair share of pitches where you get some sort of smart-ass client prospect, and all their job is to try to throw you under the bus and to trip you up and to make you look and feel silly.
Right. And, some of it is, well, the great actor Jimmy Stewart used to say, uh, I take the job very seriously, but myself not at all. And there's a little bit of that in it. You can't take yourself too seriously. The job, that's another matter. You taking the work very seriously.
Yeah. Now we're going to focus this conversation today on finding the right story. And you do a lot of work in the startup world and founders world, and where storytelling, of course, is as critical as any place to be
Mm.
able to pitch your idea, your product, or your service. And of course, we're in the throes of that with our Story Cycle Genie. And boy, I've been pitching it lots of different ways with lots of different kind of stories, trying to find that exact story. Uh, Before we get to that, your expertise in it, give us just a quick little background about your screenwriting, editing or producing background, because you've worked with lots of big names.
Yes, I came out to California originally. I'm from New York, and I was writing for Good Morning America and writing cartoons. Thundercats, some of your audience may know, is an iconic cartoon. And I would take meetings in LA because in Brooklyn there was a 718 area code back then. And in a lot of the valley here in California, there's an 818 area code. So people assumed I was a neighbor
Hmm.
incorrectly. So they would say, could you be here tomorrow for a meeting? And I'd say, sure. And in those days, I literally ran to LaGuardia Airport and got on a plane. And I started writing features. I had a 3 feature deal with Disney. I wrote television shows, kind of like a writer for hire. I was a member of the Writers Guild. And as anyone knows who's tried that, it's boom or bust. And you end up as a freelancer, which is what I was, you write for a lot of different things, like I had 2 young children, so I wrote TV news for a while, I wrote documentaries, tried to write as many cartoons as I could because they paid well and were fun to do, and I eventually settled into producing because it's a little bit more control. As a screenwriter, you are said say somewhat expendable. They can swap you out. They can buy the idea, you can get paid well, but you can be swapped out for another writer pretty easily. You're kind of that can happen. So, but producing is different because you own the material, you hire the people. So I got more involved in documentary production and did documentaries for the Learning Channel, History Channel, Court TV, Food Network. Again, kind of as a company, just expanding that kind of freelancer thing, but more for as a production company. So I did that for quite a few years, and it gave me a really great foundation in storytelling because that's the common denominator through all of these different. It sounds very varied, and I guess it is, but the common denominator is telling the story.
When you were working in these different aspects, from features to cartoons to news and whatever, did you rely on any one kind of story structure, or did you have to jump between the mediums and the genres and come at them, with a different narrative framework? Like, for instance, we just had Christopher Vogler on. I'm a big believer in his book,
Mm.
The Writer's Journey and the Hero's Journey and so forth. But I would imagine it probably doesn't play over to news that well, for instance.
It can. There's always a story structure. I guess the main thing to take out of that is there's always structure. People crave story structure. They may not say it, they may not put it in those words, but if you don't give your story structure, they're going to give structure for you. And you probably don't want that as the person who's supposedly in charge, right? You want to be in charge of the story. So I found here's a capsule, a quick example of that is most of the time you're taught in journalism to tell who, what, where, how, and why. What happened, who did it, where, just the facts, please. But when I worked for Dateline, they flipped that. They said, you're not supposed to tell us everything that goes on at first. You need to have kind of a teaser, kind of a gap. Like, tell us something that, these people, someone got murdered. If you say, well, if Joe got murdered on such and such a day, such a time by such and such a person, there's no story that the way we tell it. So essentially, it is the same structure, but it's just moving a block earlier. It's telling something that's a bit of a tease or a bit of a open-ended question at the beginning. You still have, if you're using the hero's journey, you still have a hero's journey. If you're deciding not to use a hero's journey, which is also possible, you still have to have a setup and a payoff. You have to make a bold promise in the beginning. This story is going to blow you away, or, no one knows what happened on the night of December 5th. You have to have a bold statement and you have to pay off that statement. So I've learned that, yes, certain patterns fall into place that as humans, we really can avoid. We need a certain story structure. The hero's journey is one very powerful version of that.
Yeah, and it really, to me anyways, from what I've experienced, it comes down to setup, problem, resolution. The
Hmm.
basic story structure, as Kurt Vonnegut says, a man gets in a hole, a man gets out of a hole. It
Yep.
needn't be about a man, and it needn't be about a hole. I just love that one.
Yeah, it's so true. There's some sort of advanced class thinking about this. There's a book called that's about these sort of spiral patterns that some stories take. Like you can think of famous movies where they just kind of get the characters in a situation and they struggle in that situation and you keep coming back to that situation like there's some terrible family secret and we keep in a nonlinear way go back and then finally the secret is resolved. A lot of like Faulkner novels work that way, more sophisticated storytelling. But if you're doing a movie for Netflix or you're doing anything where people might be distracted looking at their phone or something like that, it's pretty much set up payoff. It's problem resolution. You can't really get away from that. People need to, there's a gap that you fill. It's a simpler approach, really.
Yeah, that's funny because we watch a lot of TV at night. Netflix series and whatever. And I will find myself sitting there, always have my phone next to me, and I'll
Yep.
be like engaged in a show. And then next thing I know, I'm now looking down at my phone at something. And then I'll catch myself and go, okay, subconsciously, they lost my attention.
Yeah.
What just happened or did not happen in this story to make me check out? And it kind of,
Right.
I don't always have an answer for that, but boy, I'm as susceptible to it as anybody.
Sure. I mean, I'm terrible to watch Netflix series with because I've written so much television and I walk in at a certain point and go, bang, this is going to happen, then this, then that, and it's like, get out, please go away. We don't want you here because you're wrecking, so my family says, you're wrecking our appreciation of the movie.
Yeah. So far we've been talking about, entertainment, news gathering, storytelling, and so forth. What are the implications in all of this for business?
Well, I think that stories are the way that we get to know each other and the way that we make sense of the world. And we're always telling stories. When I come on your screen, you're starting to make up a story about me. And when you come on my screen, I'm making up a story about you. So let's leverage that. Uh, there's the old expression, which you've probably used, the know and like expression. Like, how do we get to like and know someone? Often it's through storytelling. Now, when I use that term in this context, I don't always mean beginning, middle, and end. I mean that there's a narrative. There's a narrative. You walk into the room, people are building a narrative about you. People look at the name of your company, they're building a narrative about that. When you use a website, the way you walk through the website and use the website, there's a narrative. You can't really get away with it because we're sequential people. It's just how we make sense of the world. So I encourage people to think about, well, what narrative are you putting out there? And how can it really matter to you and to the other person? This is the part where it gets interesting. People think, well, I'll use storytelling in business. I'll tell a story about myself. I'll tell a story about how smart I am or how I solved that problem. It doesn't always work because people need to hear what they're going to get out of it. If your story gives them a handhold, okay. But if it's just a kind of impenetrable story about how brilliant you are, that's not necessarily going to work to make a connection. So, on the most basic level, stories make connection between us. So, how can we use that?
And you do a lot of work in the startup founders world and comes down to not just a story theory about how to connect with that person across from you, but what story do you tell? How do you find that story? And so I'm kind of curious, what do you recommend to people? What kind of due diligence discovery do they need to do in advance of their audience so that they tell a story from the point of view of their audience? And they're not always, pounding their chest about how wonderful whatever they made is, but the story is about what they actually make happen for that customer.
Right. And in the startup world, there's 90-second pitch competitions, there's long form pitches. It takes a lot of different formats, but I find you really have to start from within. My approach is from within. You have to think about first, before you can interest someone else in your story, you have to be interested in your story. And so, what is it about your story that interests you that you could say why you founded this company or why you're doing this particular startup or what's important about this app? And you're going to have to find something about yourself that matters. And I call that theme. That's a theme. And I encourage people, my step one, or step, 000.1, the very, very, very first step is to use a theme generator to think about something in your life or a person in your life that really mattered to you, that changed you. Maybe someone challenged you, or you failed, or you succeeded. And this could be a person from your past. It could be a person last week. But when you start to examine that story, and it's an exercise I have people write out or talk about, once you examine that story, you'll see themes that come up. That why did that matter to you? Why did you succeed or fail? And that becomes a little bit of a engine that you can use to build a story that matters to other people. But first, you have to know what matters to you, and that's usually where I start.
Can you give us an example of one of those stories? Maybe someone you coached that came to you and said, Lee, I don't have a story. No one cares about my story, whatever. And you helped them find the theme and what happened next?
Well, I'll tell one about me where when I was in high school, we had an assignment to write a fiction story. And I happened to have a crush on that teacher. And I thought, oh, this is my chance to really impress her. But I've never written fiction before. I don't know anything about it. But I wrote kind of a silly story about talking horses or talking cows. I can't remember really. But she read it out loud in the class, which was terrifying. But I watched those people, the students, laughing at what I hoped were jokes, and she laughed at the jokes. And that was, first of all, my crush fulfilled, like, wow, okay, she likes what I wrote. But it was the very first time that I realized I could write something down that could move people. I could create some kind of emotional connection with people with something that I wrote. And that has stuck with me, and that kind of, "Okay, that feels good," or that sense of connection has really been a motor for me, a driver to keep writing stories. There's a story about the, Nike origin story, which goes in brief that one of the founders of Nike got a waffle iron for his wedding present, and he took it out to the garage and put polyurethane in it and ruined it for waffles, but turned it into a sneaker maker, who's making the waffle sole of a Nike sneaker, which is a brilliant idea. And Phil Knight, the other partner, took that around to track meets. They like literally had a box of sneakers that they had made by hand. And it would have been probably a pretty good sell, but Phil Knight really believed in running. He believed that running would make the world a better place, that if everybody ran, we'd be happier. And that's a story about himself, but it also connects with the buyer, the track coach who says, yeah, my guys need better shoes so they can be running better. He happened to have, Phil Knight had the shoes, but his pitch was not these are cheaper or, his pitch in part was these are better, but his pitch was running makes the world a better place. There's a real human connection to that story. So Nike goes from a garage based company to a global leader And you can tell the story about Hewlett Packard and Apple and other places where there's a nice story arc. A story arc helps and there's a nice setup and payoff, but it really has to do with the person. You have to be interested in your own story first. So to answer the question directly, I work with people to find out, okay, what's your story? What about you? Even if you use that in a foundational way, you don't use that every time you pitch or every time you do an elevator pitch, but you know it, you're aware of it.
So I'm really interested, fascinated in this idea about how do you find the right story? In this case, it's like, okay, what's the story about you that you are excited about? And it is interesting and you're going to share it, but you are going to share it from the point of view of your audience so they can live vicariously through you and say, oh, you're
Right.
kind of like me, or I've experienced something like that. Say, let's move on beyond startup and founder. And let's say you've got, an SMB, small, medium-sized business, you're doing well, and you're going in for a big pitch, and it's between you and one other contractor to
Yeah.
fulfill this order. Uh, Story still plays a very prominent role in that. How
Right.
then might you find a different kind of story in that situation?
I think it's understanding there's a very smart term called a story gap, that customers have a story gap. They come in needing something. So you have to understand, what is that? And how can you differentiate yourself and understanding what they really need? It's If you think, well, they're looking for the cheapest solution to the problem, you really put yourself in a big bucket with a lot of other people who are always willing to do it cheaper than you will do it, which I know as a podcast producer and media producer myself, there's always someone who's going to do it cheaper than I can do it. And, sometimes they get hired. When I think about, say, I teach a course in a school of architecture about media making and storytelling. And there was a survey done of what satisfies architects. And architects, a job well done, they want to, maybe it should be sustainable, it should be ecologically sound, it should be beautiful. These are the things that architects like. But the American Institute of Architecture also did a survey of clients. And the clients high on their list was, we're listened to. You architect, you're listening to us. You're hearing what we want. And also on their list was, the thing works, the building works, it doesn't fall apart, it looks good. But the order of importance was radically different. And I think people forget that a lot, where your client wants to be listened to. So a good question to ask in choosing the right story is, how much of a collaboration is the client looking for here? Do they want to talk it over with you and work this thing out together? Or do they just want your solution and they want it to be fast, cheap, and good, which are three things that are hard to put together in one thing, but is that what they want? So this is a research issue and it's a understanding issue where you really need to know, okay, what does the client really need? That they want, we're on Riverside right now. We're recording this on a podcast platform that has gone through various iterations. The idea of Riverside is to make it easy to do podcasts. Is that what we want as clients? Well, I use it, you use it, it's worked for us. So they have heard us and when we use this platform, they pitched, well, it's going to be easier to do a podcast. And we both said yes to that. It's not that they're friendlier, or I've never met the people who did Riverside. It's not that I even know them, but they did respond to a need of mine, which was make it easy. So the Venn diagram here, where things get interesting, the overlapping shapes are, you have to hear what the client wants, but you can't put yourself in such a big bucket that everybody could deliver that. You have to deliver uniquely into something that they say they want and need. And sometimes what they say they want is not always what they really need, which adds another level of complexity. But it is about differentiating yourself and hearing what they want.
And it's funny that you say that, because isn't that kind of a general premise too? You see it in The Hero's Journey and other big movies, is quite often you're introduced to the character, the protagonist in the story, and they really want this, but the whole story is about actually their character arc of from what they want to what they actually need that
That's
they
right.
don't recognize at the beginning of the story until they go through the trials and tribulations and come out the other end and like,
Mhm.
oh, I wanted fame and fortune, but what I actually needed was solitude
Yeah,
to have the
exactly.
impact,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's very powerful, and also, um, your clients may, say that they want efficiency, but what they really want is you to stay with them through the whole process. It's a kind of a deeper listening, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And to take the hero's journey idea, uh, often people who are pitching something or business owners, we put ourselves in the center of the story as kind of the protagonist, like we're on the hero's journey, but that actually doesn't work that well. The client is on the hero's journey,
Right.
and you have to
Yeah.
kind of position yourself as Obi-Wan Kenobi or some kind of guide without being pretentious or annoying about it, because you're really helping the client. You're in service to the client, and you're
Yeah.
really helping the client fulfill what they need and guide them through it. So it's, you can't put yourself at the center of the story and have it sell, really.
Yeah, that was my big aha when I was first introduced to the hero's journey when our son was going to film school back in the early 2000s. And I looked at it and said, well, this is a customer journey. I mean,
Mhm.
why don't they teach this in sales and marketing? Figure out where the customer is on their hero's journey for trying to achieve something that they are not currently achieving because they've got a gap, they've got a problem, and how can you then insert yourself into their narrative as their mentor or guide to help them get what they want in the travels? And to
Exactly.
me, Lee, it was such a foundational moment for me. It hit me all at once. It was like I had all these disparate
Mm.
parts of my brain working in story and whatever in the advertising, business, branding world. And then it was one night, it was aha. I go, oh
Mhm.
my God, here is the structure to what I've been looking for.
Mhm. Yeah, there are aha moments. They're good when
Yeah.
they happen.
Do you find that there are categories of stories? So again, say I'm a founder, startup, or business person, whatever, and I need to build a story library because it's not one story size fits all people.
Hmm.
And I've got to have maybe a story about me. Maybe I need to have a different story about a client that went through something similar
Right.
to my prospect is going through. Maybe it's a story about something happening in the world order that I use as an analogy to make a point about something I'm going to help them with.
Hmm.
So, with that in mind, are there different categories of themed stories that you profess?
Sure. I mean, structurally, often very similar, but every business needs to know their origin story. How'd you get this thing started? People always want to ask you, well, how'd you get started in this? And you need a good story to deliver there. A use case, you alluded to that. It's usually smart to have some customer success story. We've seen these, on packaging even. When you buy some kind of shaving cream or something, there's a customer success story right on the package sometimes. Uh, and also a who what I call a who benefits story. Now, what that is a built out testimonial. Someone will review something or say something about, oh, I really love this kind of computer because it helped me do this. But when someone can really say they benefited, it changed their life. Like, this is silly, but if I were to say, how did Zoom benefit my life? Or how did Riverside, or how did the ability to talk into a computer and talk to another person live, how did that benefit my life? Well, I could give a pretty good testimonial for, say, Zoom or this system because it's permitted me to work from anywhere and talk to anyone anywhere in the world. And I could give a pretty good pitch for that because I have benefited. So those for me are the three big areas: a origin story, uh, a, a a benefit case, and a more general use case or use story.
It's interesting thinking about Zoom versus Riverside because I use both and I pay my monthly subscription for both, which is roughly about the same amount of money. And they do the exact same thing, essentially. Really, it
Essentially.
ultimately comes to they connect us virtually and you can record it and you've got video and so forth. But I have two completely separate narratives for each of the product and I use them differently. I would never use Riverside for a large training program. I use Zoom for that. It's
Mhm.
easy. I can share my screen very easy. I can have chats and so forth. The audio quality isn't great. It's not horrible, but it's okay
Yeah.
for that large scale training. But for like you and I who produce podcasts, uh, Riverside's way better because we have
Right.
this one-on-one communication. The audio's way better. They've got a built-in AI that can clean up your audio,
Mhm.
So even though your audio is coming in from I think off your computer, I'm getting a bit of room noise. A couple years ago, I would just be stuck with that. Now I can
Right.
put it into that AI and it cleans it up like you're, got a Sony mic sitting here like I do. So, two different narratives, two different products. They both get my money,
Right.
but they, as the product, as the brand, have to understand the gap that I'm looking for. For Zoom, I can count on it, never have any problem, and I don't care about the audio quality. It's fine for virtual training. But for Riverside, it has a few more bugs in it, but I'm okay to overlook those bugs because the audio quality and then how they create your magic clips is so much better.
Right. Well, this comes to the notion of mission creep and trying to be everything to everyone. And often, especially in small businesses, you'll hear business owners say, I can address any problem to anyone. If I'm a sign painter, I'm going to paint a sign for anybody who comes in the shop. No problem. Well, it's not always great to do that because to be specific, there's a strange paradox. The more specific you are about your pitch and your story, the more generally it can reach people because people divide into groups. To get back to the storytelling notion, we're always using the stories we tell to make an evaluation about someone. Is this person in my group? Are they worth listening to? Do they deserve to have my attention by the story they're telling? And it gets into, there's a lot of people out there producing podcasts, for example. There's a lot of people out there trying to paint signs, a lot of printers, whatever you might be in your small business. But how do you really focus in on the audience so when they come into your virtual store or into your real store, how do they feel like, yeah, I made the right decision here. I got the right people. These are my people. That's a storytelling challenge most of the time.
And isn't that, again, another basic principle of storytelling is finding that singular thread, quite often that singular problem solution dynamic, so that you're not showing up like trying to be a wizard for every possible answer to anything. You are the go to expert for one thing done really, really well.
Yeah, it's so true. As a screenwriter, my naivete when I began, I believed in someone like Stanley Kubrick, who could do any kind of a movie. He could do scary movies, he could do comedy movies, he could do historical movies, and I thought, I'm going to be just like that, and I'm going to be able to do any kind of movie that they tell. Just throw it at me, I can do it. Well, it doesn't really work like that because there are such a thing as a personal brand, and there's such a thing as expertise, and people come to divide you out. So if they think you're a comedy person or a drama person, they're not going to hire you for something else unless they know you really well or your agent knows them really well. So there is this specialization is a great gift to think about exactly what you do well and do that and stick with that. And we've seen, even in the world of software where people try to throw too much stuff into the bucket and we end up leaving that particular piece of software because it's trying to be all things to all people. Just like a writer who's really known for comedy says, I'm really going to do drama. It doesn't always work to make the switch.
Besides trying to be all things to all people in your storytelling, what's another big gap you see or mistake you see that business people in particular make in their quote unquote storytelling?
I think it's a sensitivity to the listener, which I mean, I'm in Southern California, so I can get a little woo woo here, but Reading the room is a big deal. When I give keynotes and talks, I'm doing my thing, right? I'm doing the talk, but I'm also reserving a little corner of my mind to watch how people are taking it. What are they really listening? Are people starting to cough or are people starting to look away? Am I losing them or keeping them? And that really matters with a business pitch as well, or just meeting people for the first time. Are they scanning the room looking for someone else to meet? When I used to write plays in New York, I would sit in the back of the hall, in the back of the room and be anonymous and watch the play as the audience watched it. And of course, I was happy when they laughed at the jokes. And I was happy when they got really quiet during the dramatic parts. But if there was a lot of coughing and shuffling and moving around, I realized that's the part of the play that I have to cut, that I lost them there. Something happened there. And I see that now, even giving a keynote. If there's a lot of coughing and shuffling and looking at phones and kind of glancing, I got to fix that part of the keynote. And so I would say sensitivity to the listener, really being in the room, being present and reading the room is something you need to do.
So you identify something that needs to be fixed. How do you identify how you're going to fix it properly?
Well, if you're giving a pitch, say, give it to a real person. Find a spouse. I usually start with stuffed animals because I like to have eye contact. So I'll put a stuffed animal up there
And they
and
can't look at their telephone.
yeah, and they can't break away, but I try to make eye contact. And then I'll practice if it's an important pitch or a speech, I'll practice it. I'll get anyone who will listen to me because then you get to see a real live interaction. It's good to, say, read something over and over. It's good to record yourself saying it and listen back. It's good to go on a walk and try to listen, break it up, change anything you can do, but there's no substitute for just talking to a real person and trying to deliver it to them and see how they react, and then ask them. The acid test, the most difficult question of any presentation is after you finish it, whether it's 10 minutes or 1 minute or 20 minutes, ask the person, could you repeat back to me the key points of what I just said? And if the person says, I don't know, you failed. If they can deliver a version of what you said, then you know it's working.
Interesting. Now you've got these storyline sessions that you what take us through those a little bit. What are they and how do people use them?
I found that most people I teach startup founders and architects and designers predominantly, and I'm working on one for introverts because introverts are an interesting group of folks. But most people want 4 hours, 1 hour segments. Most of these I've done via Zoom, some I've done as live presentations. But if you get on a Zoom with me for an hour a week for 4 weeks, we can tackle a specific project. Most people come to me with a project. I'm doing a presentation, I want to get it right. Or I'm doing a startup founder pitch and I need to raise money, I want to get it right. Or I'm an architect, needs new business, I want to revamp how I get business. Let's do 4 hours, 1 hour pieces. So people come with an idea to workshop. And if the group is the right group, putting the cohort together is a big deal. If I can find the right group of startup founders or the right group of architectural or design people, our ideas cross-pollinate. We solve each other's problems in these groups because you give your talk to somebody and they'll be able to come back to you and help you with it. So I found that format of usually a Zoom, usually 4 hours over a month, works really well for these.
And do you have a set narrative framework that you base it on? Like I've got my story cycle system, and I also use the and but therefore narrative framework a lot, as my listeners know. Do you
Mhm.
have a structure you follow?
Sure. I mean, I usually start with the thing we just spoke about earlier is a theme detector. Let's find out why the story matters to you. And then I talk about story arc and story structure, the setup and payoff structure, and how we can fit filter really your story into a structure like that. And then it gets very specific because some people are doing a video, some people are doing a live presentation, some people are revamping a website. So then we can workshop, once we lay the foundation, we can workshop very specific ideas. Sometimes with me, offline, like we'll have office hours. I come from this academic background now at USC where I teach. So one thing that works really well is teaching a course. I do that. That's 15 weeks. So that's quite a long journey. But talking for a few hours, hook doing, breakout rooms with people, but also having office hours where you connect with me one to one to work out a specific problem. So, yes, I do have a structure because I found after doing this for 3 decades and more that there is a structure to most stories. There's different flavors and there's different pacing and there's different material, but there's certainly a structure that I can apply to almost any kind of a story.
Yeah. I found Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, which I think is reading that every screenwriter has to have.
Mhm.
My son sent me the book when he was done with it. And I thought that was a really interesting take on story structure and how he did, I think, was back in the 80s, maybe
Mhm.
he sold more family oriented screenplays than anybody else in the
Wow.
genre.
Mm.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's fun, and we even use that in a big product launch at, the company, a global company. They were doing their annual product launch, and they were sort of stymied on how to do it, and I had just read, Save the Cat, really studied it. I read it a couple, 3 times,
Mm.
and I thought, "What the hell? I'm gonna give this a go," and I said, "Let's just follow it beat by beat per Blake Snyder, and let's write out what this launch would look like."
Mhm.
And to my amazement, the client, co-created with me. In about an hour, we had something that everybody in the room looked at each other and said, "Wow, this is really
Right.
good."
Right. That's
But it
great.
had a
Yeah.
structure to it.
Yeah. Structure matters. It's often, we often think about what's at stake. If you're writing a novel or a screenplay or a play, the characters need to know what's at stake, and for themselves, and the audience has to feel that. Like, if the character at some point says, "Well, I don't really know, like, why am I in this story?" Or, "I'm not too worried about what happens in this scene." If you get that sense from the character, you lose people.
Mhm.
So, the cheapo, easy way, and cheap tricks do work, is, there's a gun in the room. Anton Chekhov was a great Russian playwright, and he had there was this expression called Chekhov's gun, which is that if you show a gun in the first act, it has to go off in the second act. What's at stake? So we don't luckily have to be as extreme as that in everyday life, but you do have to know, like, why does it matter to these people?
Yeah.
In The people who are, say, the customers or the characters in the drama, whoever you're focused on.
And do you find with your students, the people you work with, startup founders and so forth, I hear this a lot, I'm curious if you do too, or I read it into their facial expressions. It's like, Park, I actually don't really care about the theory. Just give me a structure that works. I don't even have to know why it works. Just make it easy for me.
I suppose that's true. I mean, I'm a theorist, and I found a lot of I have, creative ideas, and I found a lot of buckets to put them in. But, it does involve bit of a soul journey that, you have to think about, why does it matter to you? And then it will matter to a customer or an audience. So you got to do some self examination. I don't think it can be applied. Like when Joseph Campbell thought of the hero's journey, I don't think you can just go, okay, hero's journey, here's the boxes I have to check. There used to be software that would break down the Star Wars movies for screenwriters, and it forced you to put your screenplay into kind of a hero's journey, George Lucas thing. And boy, did that result in a lot of bad screenplays. I mean,
Right.
because you can't always go by the numbers. There is a structure, but you have to make it your own in some way.
Yeah, and after speaking with Christopher Vogler, and right before him, I had John Booker on, and he's the executive director of the Joseph Campbell Foundation. They said the same thing what you just said there too,
Mhm.
that it's not set in stone. It's just simply a guide, as
Mhm.
Campbell would say, a monomyth in this case, but use it to your own liking, manipulate it, tweak it, whatever. It's just something that seems like it's been showing up in stories since the beginning of time. And so
Right.
we know that there's a structure to it, but make it uniquely your own.
Exactly. I mean, it comes down again to that idea of you have to try it out on somebody.
Yeah.
Even if you record yourself speaking the pitch, or if you get feedback, it's very easy in this world to fool yourself. It's very easy to go up into your artist garret, create something you know to be brilliant, and just believe that without ever showing it to somebody else. Other people are your superpower in this world often.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we do with all of our guests, I ran your brand through our Story Cycle Genie, which is, just taking our IP around the Story Cycle system, again, inspired by the hero's journey, but something that you can manipulate and play with. But it really helps you sort out your overall narrative strategy based on narrative, based on setup, problem
Mhm.
resolution, and it's infused with the and but therefore framework throughout and whatever. I didn't give you a lot of time to look at it because I forgot about it and sent it to you last night while I was watching a Netflix show, by the way. So,
Uh-huh.
uh, what did you think of what you saw? I know you didn't get a chance to read through a lot of it, but what was your initial take on it?
Well, I was impressed, first of all, with the detail. It's incredibly detailed, and it does reflect things back to me that I already felt I knew because I'm a story guy. But what I
Hmm.
really liked about it was the differentiation. What's different about my company or about me? I think people forget that a lot, or they don't think about that enough. That we're we're not always going to reinvent the wheel. It would be great if I had the software chops to invent a competitor to Riverside, or do the next Zoom. I wish I had the software chops for that, but I don't. So I'm going to end up doing something that other people have done. I'm going to walk the path that other people have walked, but I'm going to do it in my own way. So, what is that own way? And I think that the evaluation would help me with that. It would help me think about, okay, what's different about me just by my experience and just what I like to do and what I'm good at. Because
Yeah.
you're going to succeed at what you're good at. It sounds obvious, but it's going to be hard to succeed at something that you're not good at or which really, really challenges you. It's good to come out of your comfort zone, but at the end of the day, people hire you for what you're good at.
Why does it matter to you? I mean, it
Yeah.
goes back to kind of the theme of what you thought about, what I really like because I so often am thinking about the audience, the audience, the audience, what's in it for them, which is important. But I don't know that I've always take that shift back and go, okay, but why is this interesting to me? That would then hopefully make it interesting to them.
Yeah.
And I think one of the first places in what I sent you that I see over and over again is as people are reading through it, they get to their position statement. And quite often they'll say, well, yeah, this is what I do, and that's good. But a lot of people can say this same thing, which
Uh,
then means to me, well, you are not articulating it clearly on your own website because this is what it's coming up with. And that's always a point of anyone going through the story cycle genie process is if that position statement is not specific enough to you, that's
mm,
when they should do what you are professing. Go back and why do I do what I do? What is interesting to me and what makes me stand out above everyone else because of my own life experience, my
yeah,
own
definitely.
talents?
Yeah. It's a point of view, POV question for sure. Like when I was in development in movies and you're in a meeting with people and people are throwing out ideas about your script, hey, could there be a girl on a motorcycle that comes in? That'd be cool. Or what if you make these people completely racially different? Like you have them white, but what about something else? Or, this should take place in Chicago, right? And it was part of my job to fend off some of those ideas because I have a point of view with that story. And it's true with business too. You can't be all things to all people, and you have a point of view, and you have to be comfortable with expressing it. It's one of the best things that I can say sometimes in business is, well, I just don't do that. People approach me and say, can you redesign my website? I say, well, I know how, but I'm not doing that right now. I don't redesign websites, and I may recommend someone. So being specific to yourself and kind of hanging on to your own point of view is a very valuable thing.
Yeah. So did it make you think a little bit about your own point of view and that you needed to get more differentiated?
It helped me see what I know. It made me think about the power of my academic experience and being a teacher as a role, being a mentor teacher. That's something that I've gotten into more uh, without really thinking about it, but it's going to help me think about the value of that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, listen, Lee, I appreciate you coming and sharing your wisdom and all this. Where can people learn more about you? And I think you might even have a little bit of a giveaway for some of our listeners.
Yes, my company is Red Cup Agency. So the
By the way, I was
website
going to ask you, why'd you name it Red Cup Agency?
is,
There's got to be a story
there's a
there.
story. The story is my mother was an artist, and she made sculpture, did some painting, and before she did any new project, she had a red cup that she drank her coffee out of. And since I'm very interested in creativity and honoring my mother and her creative work, I just decided to make the company name just be Red Cup Agency because it's a bit, you have to ask the question, right? It begs the question. Uh,
Hmm.
One of my sons became an artist, and I had the kind of cup I wanted them to use. It happened to be green. So I said, when you design the logo, could you just make this a red cup? And so that's why. So
Yeah.
redcupagency.com is the name of the company. And if you go to redcupagency.com/story business, you can get a free download of a starter kit, a storytelling starter kit that would give you an introduction to my master classes. So that's redcupagency.com/story business.
Awesome. I'm writing that down. I'll make sure I get that in the show notes too.
Great.
So, all right. Well, thank you, Lee. We really appreciate your time and your wisdom today.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure being here.
Hey, before we go, I want you to hear from some people that have been using the artful intelligence that is imbued throughout the Story Cycle Genie to create clear, concise, and compelling brand stories that won't put you to sleep.
I got goosebumps when I read it, and I was like, what sorcery is this? Because it actually reflected back to me a lot of the things that we've been working on trying to describe.
I thought it was really great. I didn't see gaps as much as opportunities. It phrased things and described what I do in ways that I hadn't considered.
It was spookily accurate. There were a lot of areas I thought, oh, this is, what is the value proposition evaluation, for instance? Something that also jumped out at me, which I loved, which was the brand archetype assessment. And it said primary, we're the sage. So we've got knowledge and expertise. And I hadn't thought about that in that way. The sage. Secondary, the magician. We're transforming events. Love that description. And then the third, which is really part of our service, is the caregiver. The sage, the magician, the caregiver. These are great takeaways. I love it.
Wow. Gave me the opportunity to try your genie, and it is brilliant. I mean, you just did a wonderful job with that. And I'm not surprised it sort of had that impact.
It was fascinating. It was fun to see, my story translated back into this, system and looking at the archetypes and, my positioning. I was like, oh, am I doing it right? And my narrative. But it very much eye-opening into the importance of story.
I got to tell you, Park, I was blown away by that report, and I think I kept questioning you, like, are you sure that this was generated automatically? It was remarkably insightful about how I try to position myself, and it even, I think, surfaced a couple things that I wouldn't have expected to show up in a report like that. So just very, almost goosebumpy, scary. I couldn't promote it more to people listening. Like, you got to try this thing out. It's really spooky, good.
Now you can test the strength of your brand story at storycyclegenie.ai for free. It's going to give you a grade from A+ to F- and a 14-point storytelling assessment that'll validate what you're doing well, reveal gaps that you can quickly fix, and inspire you with new ways to think about your brand story. So check out the artful intelligence of the Story Cycle Genie at storycyclegenie.ai. I want to thank you so much for listening today. If you would do me a huge favor and jump over to iTunes and give me a rating and especially a review, people really enjoy those, and it helps us stand out in the very crowded podcast world out there. Now, I hope you'll join me next Monday when Shamir Duverseau, the founder of Smart Panda Labs, will be joining us. We explore what happens to your customer after they click on your offer and the importance of storytelling in your post-click world. You're not going to want to miss it. And until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make that one epic. Thanks so much for listening.